Tēnā koutou katoa, greetings to you all from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And congratulations, Blue Quills, on your 50th anniversary. You know, I've recently joined the staff of Te Whare Wānanga or Awanuiarangi in Whakatane, which is the institution my father and others founded in our tribal territories. And it's good to go home. But I also recognise the particular struggles that our Indigenous institutions have to develop, you know, Indigenous pathways in the whole of the education sort of domain. So I understand all the work of all the people who have invested and believed in the work that Blue Quills have done, and so very proud to support you. And it's good to talk to you, even though this is by recording. You know, hopefully it's a little bit interactive. Yeah. I also want to acknowledge all the recent news about the finding of remains in the grounds of residential schools in Canada. You know, I know and recognise the story of residential schools, and I know that it's not a surprise to those of you who have family legacies in that school system, and those of you who've done research. So from Aotearoa, I send all of you my love, our love. I know how, you know, even though you know how deeply that impacts on our well-being and our sense of certainty, I think, about the world. It just shakes us back to that sort of world where we had no control over what was happening to us. So just thank you for those of you who've remained strong and who've retained that oral history and that memory and who've continued to fight on. And it's a really good example, I think, of, you know, the many times Indigenous peoples have been told we should just get over things from our colonisation. We should just move over, you know, just get on with our lives, and the past doesn't matter, but the past does matter. And it's really important that we bring our past with us. We acknowledge what has happened, and that takes a lot of courage, but we figure out how to heal and how to look after ourselves and look after the next generation. So I do actually see it as a story of persistence, but also a story of hope. You know, and a story of validation of knowledge. And really the research, you know, that I've done in my work has been trying to validate, legitimate Indigenous knowledge, our stories and our ways of framing research and thinking about the research that matters. So I wrote Decolonising Methodologies actually more than 20 years ago. Part of it I wrote when I was a master's student, and then part of it I wrote as a PhD student, and then part of it I wrote it after my PhD. But it was based on, you know, everything I've learned from my own communities and from my travels, because I had actually been to many other Indigenous contexts as a young person, spent some years in North America, but also traveling after that. So the work of decolonising methodologies has been this work of uncovering, understanding colonisation and colonialism, but uncovering the stories that we know to be true, and to kind of think about how we develop the methodologies to do that. But more importantly, because our world is not just about we're not defined just about colonization. We were here and you were where you are, your peoples, even though we've been moved around a bit, long before European colonization occurred. And our worldview, our philosophies, our epistemologies, if you like, our values, our relationships and stories, they predate colonization. So part of the decolonizing methodologies is to find that, to go back to those ways and to make them work for us today. So it's not just going back simply for the sake of it, but going back to, some people talk about finding the teachings that we were left with, finding the value system, the ways of knowing that work for us. And in a way are still embedded in many of our practices, but they've become disconnected, either through language or displacement, and really being battered and smashed by settler colonialism. So I see in decolonizing methodologies an ongoing challenge to the formal Western academy, but also it's a challenge to us not to rest on what we just know, but to continue to frame what's important for Indigenous peoples, to keep pushing. And, what I think is courageous about Indigenous peoples is the ability to push through trauma and push through that pain. And I think we can do it because we're a collective, even though we're still restoring our real collective selves. But it's this drive to work through that and to use it in a sense to strengthen ourselves, to commit ourselves, to kind of valuing the fact that our peoples have survived this long and to take that responsibility forward. So, yeah, it's been like 30 years of work in terms of research, understanding the system of research, the institution of research, and where we have been colonized by that research, subject to what's called scientific racism by that system, but also where we've found little pockets of space that we've been able to develop what we now know as Indigenous studies or Indigenous education or Indigenous health, that in a way we've had to, use the ladder or scaffolding, it's sometimes called, to rebuild our own knowledge system and launch ourselves into new and exciting ways, I think, of organising knowledge. And I think one of the strengths of being an Indigenous institution is having a little bit more freedom to do that. It's not a lot of freedom, but it's space to really think about those ideas and what that means then for teaching a 21st century education. Because I think, yes, I know my communities want, they want to know our history and our language and culture and all those things, but they also want to travel the world, participate in the economy such as it is, and learn new things about cool stuff. And I think our challenge is to make Indigenous knowledge cool stuff, but also to help them take their Indigenous identities, culture, language into other worlds and to bring back the good stuff, if you like, to our communities. So I know our young people aspire to be, astronauts and scientists and, all these new careers that were a possibility when I was growing up. And I know with my grandsons, I want them to do that. but I want them to be Māori in all that they do. I want them to think Māori, to value what we've taught them to value, to be proud of who they are, and be able to, I think, stay strong, often in a world where we know that what we call their wairua, their spirituality, is often under direct attack or subtly undermined. So I think those aspirations are important in the Māori world, and I know in other Indigenous communities, they want their young people to thrive as well in both worlds. But the energy really is that we have to put that energy into restoring our own world and to have our people fall in love with that world again, and commit to not just talking about it, but learning how to live with that, and how to live with that in the 21st century. And I say that in the context of, a pandemic that I know all of us around the world are trying to navigate. And it is, I don't know about you, but here in Aotearoa, I think it's reminded us how important we are to each other. It's reminded us that our values system of taking care of our elders is a really important value system. And, for us under lockdown, it kicked in intuitively in terms of, how people rearranged themselves before lockdown, how they distributed food, how younger people really gave up their studies to get jobs, such as they were, in order to support the rest of their family. So all those things in the context of the coronavirus pandemic, I think intuitively reminded many Indigenous communities of what it means to survive. That resiliency, if you like, when you're brought back sitting on the bones of your bum, and you have to survive. What is it you do to survive? And I think our story is you look after your elders, you look after your children, you think collectively, you think of ways to care for a community, and it's not just every individual for themselves. So I do see connections all the time between what we do in real life and what that means for research, what that means for knowledge, what that means for teaching and learning, for how we organise institutions, how we teach a discipline. I don't think of the theory of research method as being abstract from the theory of how we live our lives. I'm inspired all the time by how we live our lives, because in there, I think, are the lessons that I've used for thinking about methodologies, which really is just a theory of method. Why do you use the method you use? What's the rationale for that? It's no fancy abstract idea. It's why do you do what you do? So I'm not sure if you've seen it, but the third edition of Decolonising Methodologies has just come out. I'm just looking at it. Wait a minute, I'll show it to you. It's the yellow edition. The first one was blue, second one was pink, and this third one is bright yellow, so it sticks out. Anyway, I've done a couple of different things in this edition, because when the publishers asked me about it, about doing a third edition, I really had to think long and hard about whether it would still be relevant. I wrote it a long time ago. So I had to think deeply about what made it relevant, had to ask quite a few people whether it was worth doing that. So in the new edition, I asked some scholars, young ones, who were brought up, if you like, on decolonising methodologies when they did their studies, and they're now teachers and they use it. So I asked each of them to contribute 800 words to the introduction. So that it has a new introduction, and it's a co-introduction written by these eight scholars from around the world. And I'm really pleased with what they've done. It's exciting. It just kind of reinforces this notion of, intergenerational knowledge, that how do we take what we learn and take it forward to the next generation of teachers, next generation of researchers. I've also added some poetry, some of my own and some by a colleague, and I've added a new chapter with some new projects. And I just want to mention some of those new projects, because I did write, a lot of this under lockdown. And I think the lockdown in last year really did force a big sort of rethink around the world about what mattered. And the language has changed. I hear words like caring, being kind, more and more often in the education sector than I've ever heard before. Education has really never given that message about being kind, has it? It assumes that it is kind because it's delivering this kind of liberal idea of education, and then neoliberal idea, and then settler colonial idea of education, that in itself is a kindness. But I think, being kind is about more than, I'm feeling kind towards you, but it's the kindness of actions. It's the kindness of curriculum, the kindness of pedagogy, and the kindness of being human and understanding the humanness of us all. So that sort of made me think about these other projects. And, for the last couple of years, I've asked graduate students and community people I've spoken to what they thought some of the new projects would be. And we've had workshops, in Montana, for example, we had a great workshop at the NASA conference in, I think that was in Los Angeles, and another one here in Aotearoa, just asking young people what were the new projects. So my first new project I've called Loving. Loving. That's not generally a research method, loving, but I think it's a really great decolonising method or methodology. I think it's a great Indigenous methodology, that what we do has to come from a place of love. And I say that quite deliberately, because I think we all think, yeah, we love our people, we love what we do. But, our people can be quite hard to love. They're not all fabulous. Many of our communities walk away, have walked away from their identity, haven't just been pushed away. I think it's a really complicated space. And sometimes loving our people is very challenging. And we've got to figure out what that means as researchers, to come from a place of love. I think it means more than just not doing, exploitative research, not doing deficit-oriented research. And it comes not just from wanting to do well, but having processes and ethics and skills and ways of thinking that help us not only come from a place of love, but journey to a place of love. And I think that is going to be a really challenging approach to research. And, another one I've got is actually the complete opposite. In a sense, and it's come from, people have asked me, when you're working in these hard spaces, whether it's dealing with addiction or trauma, those kinds of dark places, when do you know to walk away? When do you know when to let go? And that's a hard one, because in a sense, the value system is not to let go. But if you're dealing in some spaces, and those of you who work in, area of addictions and trauma, you will know what I'm talking about, that when trying to address the needs of, a group or a person, and the implications of doing that mean a whole lot of others who you love and care for, including your own family, start to suffer when the actions of others begin to undermine and destroy those who you thought might be safe. And when do you walk away? When do you make a decision? For example, your own health and safety, your own family, your own well-being, the well-being of, the larger group is more important. And that's a really hard ethical issue. But I know that people have asked me that question. When do you let go? When do you simply abandon a project and make the decision that you are not the person that's going to be able to do this right now, that you've got to take a rest, you've got to press the pause button and turn to those you love and start to strengthen them. And it might be you can come back to that bigger project, or it might be you have to simply stand aside and support others to do it. I think those are kind of brave issues for anyone, but also as researchers. When do we stop scraping at the scab, if you like? When do we start moving from documenting what went wrong to trying to put more energy into the future, hopeful, positive futures? How do we strike that balance? And I think it's up to each person, what feels good, what feels right, and what feels good for the greater good of your own family and community. I think those are all factors that go into it. So I don't really want to speak for long. This is my second attempt, by the way, at this talk. My first attempt was a complete disaster, not because of what I was trying to say, but I forgot to turn off my phone. And there was then the police went past my house, there were sirens. So the noise impact was just not helpful. But today it's a Sunday morning here. It's quiet, hopefully. And I feel good at talking to you. Can't see you, but I just wanted to make a contribution to your conference and to wish you all well, and to be well and to be strong for each other, because in your strength, we gain strength. In your courage, we gain courage. and we need to look after ourselves collectively across the world. So enjoy the rest of your conference. Take care and much love.